I remember the sky was perfect. That is the part no one believes. They think I'm going to start with the fire, with the light, with the sound that was not a sound. But I am not. I'm going to start with the sky. Because the sky that morning was so blue, so clean, so absolutely ordinary, that I have spent the rest of my life being afraid of clear days. August 6th, 1945. A Monday. I know it was a Monday because my mother had hung the laundry. She always hung the laundry on Mondays, even during the war, even when there was almost nothing left to wash, even when the shirts were patched so many times they were more thread than cloth. Monday was laundry day. And laundry day meant the sky mattered, because if it rained the shirts would not dry. And if the shirts did not dry, my mother would stand at the window and look at the clouds with the expression of a woman who had been personally betrayed by the weather. But that morning there were no clouds. Not one. The sky was empty and blue and endless, and the sun was already warm at 8 o'clock, and my mother was in the yard hanging shirts on the line. And the shirts were moving a little in a breeze I could feel on my face through the open window. And everything was ordinary. That is the word I keep coming back to. Ordinary. The most dangerous word in any language. Because ordinary is what the world looks like 1 second before it ends. My name was I do not know which tense to use anymore. I was born in Hiroshima, in the Nakajima district, near the river, in a wooden house with a tile roof and a small garden where my father grew cucumbers and my mother grew morning glories on a bamboo trellis. I was 31 years old that summer. I had been a school teacher before the war. Mathematics. I taught mathematics to children who were 12 and 13 and 14, children who fidgeted and passed notes and looked out the window when I was explaining fractions. And I loved them for it. I loved them for their boredom. I loved them for their wandering eyes. I loved them for being children in a world that was trying very hard to turn them into something else. The war had taken my school, not destroyed it, taken it, requisitioned it. The building was used for something military now. I was not told what. I was told to find other work, useful work, war work. So I worked at a factory, a small factory near the AOI bridge that made parts for something I was not allowed to ask about. Metal pieces, stamped and shaped and packed into crates that were taken away by truck every Thursday. I did not know what the pieces were for. I did not ask. You did not ask things in those days. You worked, you bowed, you said hey, you went home, you ate whatever there was to eat, which was less every month, and you did not ask. My wife's name was Yoshiko. I need to say her name early, before the story takes it from me, before the weight of what comes next makes it hard to say anything at all. Yoshiko. She was 28, small, quick. She laughed with her whole body, a laugh that started in her stomach and came up through her chest and out of her mouth like a bird escaping a cage. She covered her mouth when she laughed because her mother had taught her that a woman should not show her teeth, but her eyes gave her away. Her eyes always gave her away. They crinkled at the corners and shone, and you could see the laugh in them even when her hand was over her mouth. We had been married for 6 years. We had a daughter, Fumiko. She was 4 years old, black hair cut straight across her forehead, a gap where her 2 front teeth had fallen out and the new ones had not yet come in, a laugh like her mother's, uncontainable, leaking out from behind small hands. Fumiko was afraid of caterpillars and in love with dragonflies. She could tell you the difference between 6 kinds of dragonflies. She had names for all of them. The red ones were aka Tombo, which everyone called them, but the blue ones she called Sora Tombo sky dragonflies, a name she had invented herself, and she said it with such authority that I never corrected her. She was 4 years old. I need you to hold that number. 4. My father was not alive. He had died 2 years before, not in the war, of pneumonia. In the winter of 1943, in the back room of our house, coughing into a cloth that my mother washed and washed until the blood would not come out anymore. He had been a quiet man, a gardener by passion, a clerk by trade. He worked at the prefectural office for 30 years, adding numbers in a ledger with a brush pen. and he came home every evening at the same time, and he took off his shoes at the door, and he went straight to the garden. The garden was his country, his kingdom, his private territory. He grew cucumbers and tomatoes and eggplant and radishes, and he spoke to them, not the way you speak to a person, the way you speak to something you are raising: encouragement, correction, quiet praise. I would watch him from the window, kneeling in the dirt, his hands black to the wrists, talking to a cucumber vine as though it were a student who needed patience. When he died, the garden died with him. Nobody had his hands, nobody had his patience. Nobody knew which plants needed more water and which needed less, which ones liked the morning sun and which preferred the afternoon shade. My mother tried for one season. The cucumbers came up bitter. The tomatoes split on the vine. She did not try again. The garden became a patch of dirt and weeds, and eventually the neighborhood association told us to plant sweet potatoes in it, because sweet potatoes were useful and ornamental gardens were not useful, and usefulness was the only currency that mattered anymore. So we planted sweet potatoes in the place where my father had grown tomatoes and talked to cucumbers, and the sweet potatoes grew. Because sweet potatoes grow anywhere. Because sweet potatoes do not need to be spoken to. But they did not taste like anything my father would have recognized as food that morning. I was in the house, getting ready for work. Late, a little. I had slept badly. The air raids had kept us in the shelter 3 nights that week. And even on the nights when there were no raids, I lay awake listening for the sirens, and the listening was almost worse than the sirens themselves. Because at least when the sirens came, you knew. You knew it was happening. You got up. You moved. You went to the shelter. But the listening, the waiting, the lying in the dark, with your ears stretched open like hands trying to catch something falling, that was the thing that wore you down. That was the thing that made the bags under your eyes and the tremor in your fingers and the way you sometimes stopped in the middle of a sentence and forgot what you were saying, not because you had lost the thought, but because your mind had gone to the window to check the sky. Again. 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 The shelter was a hole in the ground. I should tell you about the shelter because we spent so much of our lives in it that it became a kind of second home. A home underground. A home made of fear. It was in the yard behind the house. We had dug it ourselves. My mother and I, Yoshiko, helped when Fumiko was napping. We dug it with shovels and with our hands, and we lined it with boards, and we covered the top with more boards and a layer of dirt, and we put a wooden lid over the entrance, and we called it a shelter. It was barely deep enough to sit in without bumping your head. It smelled of earth and damp wood, and the vinegar my mother kept in a jar near the entrance, because someone had told her vinegar repelled insects. We kept things in the shelter. A jug of water, a tin of crackers that had gone stale months ago, but that we kept anyway because they were there, because having them was better than not having them, the way having a prayer is better than not having one, even when you're not sure anyone is listening. We kept a blanket for Fumiko, a small blanket with blue flowers on it, that Yoshiko had sewn from a piece of old curtain. Fumiko called it her ocean blanket, because the blue flowers looked like waves to her. When the sirens came, we went into the hole. The 4 of us. My mother, Yoshiko, Fumiko in Yoshiko's arms, and me. We sat in the dark and the damp and we listened to the planes overhead, and my mother would count them by the sound of the engines. 1, 2, 3, the way she counted everything, carefully, precisely, as though counting were a form of control. And Fumiko would press her face into her ocean blanket, and Yoshiko would press her face into Fumiko's hair, and I would press my back against the earth wall of the shelter and feel the dirt against my spine and think, this is what it has come to. This is what life is now. Sitting in a hole, in the dark, listening to the sky, and the planes would pass. Or not, and the bombs would fall somewhere else. Or not, and we would climb out, and go back inside, and try to sleep. And Monday would come, and my mother would hang the laundry, because Monday was laundry day, because some things do not stop for wars. Yoshiko was feeding Fumiko in the kitchen. Rice. a very small bowl of rice. The rice was brown and coarse and had things in it that were not rice, barley, millet, sweet potato, because pure rice was a memory now, like sugar, like fish, like the fat red tomatoes my father used to grow before the war took his garden for something more useful. Fumiko was eating slowly. She always ate slowly. She chewed each bite many times with great seriousness, as though she were conducting an investigation into the nature of food. Yoshiko was watching her eat, sitting across from her with her chin in her hand, not eating herself. I noticed that. I noticed it the way you notice things without noticing them, the way you file something away in a corner of your mind and do not look at it directly, because looking at it directly would mean asking the question, and asking the question would mean hearing the answer, and the answer was that my wife was not eating because there was not enough, and she was giving her portion to our daughter, and she had been doing this for weeks, maybe months, and I had been pretending not to see. We were all pretending not to see things in those days. Not seeing was a skill, a survival skill. Like knowing which shelter to run to, like knowing how to put out an incendiary bomb with sand and a bucket, like knowing how to bow deeply enough that the neighborhood captain would not report you for insufficient enthusiasm. Not seeing was how you got through. Fumiko had said something at breakfast. I want to tell you what she said, because it is one of the last things she ever said, and because it was so ordinary, and because the ordinary things are the ones that cut deepest afterward. Not the last words, not the profound statements, the ordinary things. She looked up from her rice and she said, "Mama, can we catch dragonflies today?" And Yoshiko said, "Maybe this afternoon, if it is not too hot." And Fumiko said, "I want to catch a blue one, a Sorotombo." And Yoshiko said, "We will try." And Fumiko went back to her rice, satisfied. The future settled, the afternoon accounted for. A blue dragonfly waiting for her in the tall grass by the river. And all she had to do was finish her rice and wait for the heat to break. She was 4 years old, and her afternoon was planned, and the sky outside the window was blue and perfect, and held no dragonflies, and no bombers, and no sign of anything at all except Monday. My mother was in the yard. I could hear her through the window, the soft flap of wet cloth being shaken out, the creak of the bamboo pole. She was humming an old song, a song from her village in the countryside, a place I had visited twice as a child and remembered mostly as green. Green hills, green rice paddies, green silence. She hummed that song every Monday. I think it was the song her mother had hummed while hanging laundry, and her mother's mother before that, and so on back through the generations, an unbroken chain of women humming the same melody over wet shirts on Monday mornings, and the melody had become so tangled up with the act of hanging laundry that my mother could not do one without the other. I stood at the window and listened to her hum, and I thought I should go out and help her, and I did not go out, because I was late, because the factory started at 8:30, because the foreman noted tardiness in a book, and the book went to someone, and the someone sent it to someone else, and eventually a man in a uniform might come to your house and ask why you were not more dedicated to the war effort. So I did not go out. I stayed inside. I buttoned my shirt. I drank a cup of weak tea that tasted like warm water with a rumor of tea in it, and my mother went on humming in the yard. I want to tell you about the morning, the ordinary morning, before. I want to stay in it a little longer, because the morning is the part I have been living in for decades. The morning is the room I go back to in my mind when the other rooms are too much. The morning is where Fumiko is still eating her rice, where Yoshiko is still watching her with her chin in her hand, where my mother is still humming in the yard. The morning is where they are still alive, and I know that if I keep talking about the morning, I do not have to get to 8:15. But I have to get to 8:15, because that is why I'm telling you this. Because someone has to. I left the house at 10 minutes past 8. I kissed Fumiko on the top of her head. Her hair smelled like the soap Yoshiko made from ash and fat, a sharp, clean smell that I have never encountered since without feeling my knees go weak. I said to Yoshiko, "I will be home before dark." She said, "Be careful." That was our ritual every morning, the same words, in the same order. Like a prayer, like a spell. As though saying the words could make them true, as though be careful were a shield I could carry with me, made of her voice, and as long as I had it, nothing could touch me. I said to my mother through the window, "The shirts look clean," she said without turning. "Of course they look clean. I washed them." I smiled. I walked out the door. I turned left on the street. I walked toward the bridge. The neighborhood was waking up around me. Mr. Tanaka, 3 doors down, was sweeping his front step. He swept his front step every morning at the same time. He was 70 years old. His back was bent. His broom was made of bamboo strips tied with wire, and it made a soft scratching sound on the stone that I could hear from half a block away. He nodded at me as I passed. I nodded back. We did not speak. We had never spoken much. He was from the old generation, the generation that communicated in nods and bows, and the precise angles of the body, and a nod from Mr. Tanaka was worth a paragraph from anyone else. His wife had died the year before. His sons were in the army, both of them, somewhere in the Pacific. He did not know where. He had not received a letter in 4 months. He swept his step every morning anyway, because that is what Mr. Tanaka did. That is who Mr. Tanaka was. A man who swept. Mrs. Fujimoto was in her yard, looking at her persimmon tree. She was always looking at her persimmon tree. It was the only tree left on our street. The others had been cut down for firewood, or for the firebreak demolitions. But Mrs. Fujimoto's persimmon tree had survived, because Mrs. Fujimoto was a woman of 75 who had once chased a neighborhood official off her property with a rake when he came to mark the tree for removal. She was 4 feet 11 inches tall. The official was 6 feet. He left. The tree stayed. She stood under it now, in the early morning, looking up into its branches the way you look up at a cathedral ceiling, with reverence, with ownership, with the quiet pride of a woman who had fought for something small and won. Persimmons were not ripe yet. They were small and green and hard. They would be ready in October, November. She was planning for November. She was standing under a tree in a city that had not been bombed, planning for November. And the planning was an act of faith so large and so unconscious that it makes me weep to think about it now. To plan for November, to believe in November, to believe that there would be a November, and that the persimmons would ripen in it, and that she would be there to pick them. There was an air raid alert at 7:31. I know the exact time because I was passing the clock on the post office when the siren started. The clock said 7:31. The siren rose, that long climbing wail that lived in your spine, and I stopped walking, and everyone on the street stopped walking, and we all looked up. The sky was empty, blue and empty. We waited. The all clear came 8 minutes later. A single plane had been spotted, a reconnaissance plane, someone said. A weather plane, flying very high, too high to see, already gone. People shrugged, people resumed walking. People went back to what they had been doing. An air raid alert was not news. We had them every day, sometimes twice a day, sometimes 3 times. Most of them were nothing, a plane passing through, a false reading, a shadow on a radar that turned out to be clouds. You got used to them. You got used to the siren the way you get used to a barking dog. The first time, you jump. The 10th time, you notice. The 100th time, you keep eating your rice. We were past the 100th time. We did not jump anymore. I walked on. 7:40, 7:45, 7:50. The streets were fuller now, not the busier before the war, when the city had been full and loud, and the markets had been piled with food, and the streetcars had been packed with people going to work, going to shop, going to visit, going to live. This was a different kind of busy, a thinner kind, a quieter kind. People moved quickly, heads down, purposes set. No one lingered, no one window shopped, because there was nothing in the windows to shop for. The display cases in the department stores had been empty for over a year. Some shops had put up signs that said things like, "Luxury is the enemy, and we don't want anything until we win." I passed a group of students, middle school girls, maybe 14 or 15. They were walking in a line wearing work clothes instead of school uniforms, heading to one of the demolition sites. The demolition. I should explain that, because it matters. The city had been tearing itself apart for months. On purpose. They were demolishing buildings, houses, shops, whole blocks to create fire breaks. Open lanes through the city where fire could not jump from building to building the way it had in Tokyo, the way it had in Osaka, the way it had in 60 other cities the bombers had already visited. Hiroshima had not been bombed. Not yet. That was the strange thing. The thing everyone talked about. The thing that made people nervous in a way that being bombed, oddly, might not have. Because when you have been bombed, you know the worst. You have seen it. You have lived through it, or you have not. But when you have not been bombed, when every city around you has been burned and broken and yours is still standing untouched, whole, you do not feel lucky. You feel watched. You feel like something is waiting. You feel like the sky is holding its breath. Those girls, the students, they were walking toward the demolition zone near the center of the city. They would spend the day pulling apart houses with their hands, passing tiles and beams in lines, stacking rubble. They were children. They were doing the work of soldiers because there were no soldiers left. The soldiers were on islands I could not find on a map, dying in places whose names I could not pronounce. And back home, the war was being fought by children and old men and women whose husbands were gone. I watched those girls walk past me. One of them was laughing at something, a private joke. She had her hand over her mouth, the way Yoshiko did, and her eyes were crinkling, and for 1 second, she was not a girl going to demolish houses in a city that was waiting to be destroyed. She was just a girl. Laughing at a joke on a Monday morning in August, I walked on. I was 6 blocks from the factory when it happened. 6 blocks. I know the distance, because I have walked it since, many times. I have counted the steps, I have measured the blocks. I have stood on the exact spot and looked up at the exact sky and tried to feel what I felt in the moment before, and I cannot. The moment before is gone. It exists only in the telling. It does not live in the ground or the air or the rebuilt streets. It lives only in me. I will tell you what I remember. I will tell you as carefully as I can, because the telling is the only thing I have left to give, and I want to give it honestly, even the parts that do not make sense, even the parts I'm not sure about, even the parts I might be remembering wrong, because memory, after a thing like this, becomes a broken mirror, and you can see pieces of the truth in it, but never the whole face. There was a light. That is not the right word. Light is a word for lamps, for candles, for the sun coming through a window, for the glow of a firefly in a jar. This was not light. This was the end of darkness, the total, absolute, annihilating end of every shadow in the world. It came from above, and it came from everywhere. And it came from inside my own eyes, for 1 instant, less than an instant, less than a heartbeat, less than the time it takes to blink, the entire world turned white. Not bright, not brilliant, white. The way a page is white. The way a bone is white. The way nothing is white. I did not see the flash. I was the flash. For 1 fraction of a second, there was no difference between me and the light. There was no me. There was no street. There was no city. There was only the white. And inside the white, a heat. The heat. I have to talk about the heat, because the heat was the thing. The heat was the messenger. The heat arrived before the sound, before the wind, before the understanding. The heat came first. It touched my skin, the left side of my face, my left arm, my left hand. I was facing south. The bomb was to the southeast. The heat touched me the way a hand touches a stove. Not gradually, not gently, all at once. Total, complete. And in that instant, that tiny, shattered instant, my skin understood something that my mind would not understand for hours. My skin understood that the world had changed, that whatever had just happened was not a bomb, not a fire, not any weapon I had been trained to prepare for or fear. It was something else, something new, something that did not have a name yet. Then the sound, except it was not a sound, not really. Sound is something you hear. This was something you became. It was a pressure, a wall of pressure, moving through the air faster than thought. It hit me in the chest and lifted me off my feet and threw me. I do not know how far, I do not know in which direction. And I was in the air, and then I was on the ground, and then there was something on top of me, a piece of wall, or a beam, or a door, or something that had been a building 1 second ago and was now just weight. Weight on my back. Weight on my legs. Darkness, and then dust. A dust so thick, so total, that breathing became a choice, a conscious, deliberate act. You had to decide to breathe. You had to force your mouth open and pull the air in, and the air was not air. It was grit and powder and the taste of plaster, and something else, something chemical, something that burned the inside of your nose and the back of your throat. I lay there. I do not know for how long. Minutes. Maybe more. I lay under the weight, in the dust, in the dark, breathing the burning air, and I thought very calmly, very clearly, as though from a great distance, I am alive. And then, less calmly, Yoshiko. And then, not calmly at all, Fumiko. I moved. I do not remember deciding to move. I remember moving. I remember the weight shifting. I remember pushing. I remember pain in my left arm, sharp and bright. The kind of pain that has a color, and the color was red. And I pushed through it the way you push through a door that is stuck, with your shoulder, with your whole body, with everything you have. I pushed, and the weight moved, and I crawled out from under it into a world I did not recognize. I have to stop here for a moment. I have to breathe, because the world I crawled out into is the world I have been trying to describe for the rest of my life, and I have never succeeded, and I am not going to succeed now, and I need you to understand that before I try. What I am about to tell you is not the whole truth. The whole truth is too large, too broken, too many pieces. I can only give you my pieces. The ones I saw, the ones I carry. The city was gone. I do not mean damaged. I do not mean burning. I do not mean destroyed. I mean gone. Where there had been buildings, there were no buildings. Where there had been streets, there were no streets. Where there had been a city, a living, breathing, ordinary city of 300,000 people who had gotten up that morning and dressed and eaten and kissed their children and gone out their doors into a blue and cloudless sky. There was nothing. A flatness. A silence so large and so wrong that it felt like a sound, the loudest sound I had ever heard. The silence of everything that should have been there and was not. The sky was not blue anymore. It was brown, a dark, churning, living brown, like the inside of a furnace, like the belly of a beast. The cloud that I would later learn had a shape, the shape that would become the most famous shape in the history of the world. The cloud was above me, but I did not see its shape. From below, from inside, from the ground, the cloud was not a mushroom, it was not a pillar, it was not anything with a name. It was just the sky dying. I stood up. My left arm was burned. I could see the skin. I will not describe the skin. I will only say that I looked at my arm and I did not recognize it as mine. It looked like it belonged to someone else, something else. It did not look like a human arm. I stood up and I turned toward home, toward where home had been, and I began to walk. The walking. I need to tell you about the walking because the walking is where the story lives, not in the flash, not in the light, not in the sound, in the walking, in what I saw as I walked. The first thing I saw was a woman. She was standing in the middle of what had been a street. I think it had been a street. There were no markers. No buildings on either side to tell you where the street ended, and the houses began. Just flatness, rubble. The occasional piece of something sticking up, a pipe, a beam, a piece of tile. She was standing very still. Her clothes were gone. Most of them, what was left, hung from her in strips. Her hair was standing up from her head, not the way hair stands in wind, but the way hair stands when it has been singed, fused, burned into a shape it was never meant to hold. She was holding something in her arms. I thought it was a bundle of cloth. I walked closer. It was not a bundle of cloth. I am not going to tell you what it was. I'm going to tell you that she looked at me as I passed, and her eyes were open, and her mouth was open, and no sound was coming out. And I understood that she was trying to ask me for help. And I understood that I could not help her. And I understood that she understood that I could not help her. And I walked past. I walked past a woman holding her child in the middle of a road that no longer existed. And I did not stop. Because if I stopped for her, if I stopped for anyone, I was never going to get home. I was never going to find them. I was going to sit down in the rubble and become part of the rubble. And my daughter was 6 blocks away, and I had told my wife I would be home before dark. So I walked. The people. I have to tell you about the people. I do not want to. I have not wanted to for 80 years. But the people are the story. The light is not the story. The bomb is not the story. The science is not the story. The people are the story. They were walking, all of them, in every direction and in no direction. They walked the way people walk in dreams, slowly, without purpose, without destination. Arms held out in front of them, and I did not understand why at first, until I looked more closely and I saw that the skin on their arms was hanging from their hands, from their fingers, like cloth, like wet paper, like something that had come loose from the body and had not yet decided to fall. They held their arms out, because if they let their arms drop, the skin would tear. I saw this. I saw a man walking with his arms out, and the skin of his hands hanging from his fingertips in long, pale, dripping strips, and his face was calm. Not peaceful, calm. The calm of a person who has passed through the far side of pain and come out into a place where pain is no longer the point, where the body has given up on pain and moved into something else, something beyond pain, something that does not have a name in any language I know. I saw children. I will not describe the children, I will only say that I saw them, and that they were the size of Fumiko, and that they were not Fumiko, and that I had to keep walking. The river. I came to the river. The Motoyasu River. The river I had crossed every day of my life on the way to the factory. The river where I had taken Fumiko to watch the boats. The river where Yoshiko and I had walked together on summer evenings before the war, eating shaved ice from paper cones, and the ice had been sweet and cold, and the evening had been warm, and we had been young, and we had not known how young we were. The river was full of people, not swimming, not wading, lying. They had crawled to the water because they were burning, because their skin was burning, and their bodies were burning, and the only thought left in them was water. And they had crawled and dragged and stumbled to the river, and they had gone in, and some of them had not come out. The river was full of bodies. I stood on the bank and looked at the river, and the river looked back at me, and I do not think I will ever forgive it for what it showed me. I do not think I will ever forgive any river for being a river, for being the place where people go to die when they cannot think of anywhere else to go. I crossed. I do not remember how. I think I waded. I think the water was warm. I think the water should not have been warm. I think the water was warm because of things I do not want to think about. I crossed the river and I kept walking toward Nakajima, toward home. There was fire now. Not the fire of the flash. That fire was already past. This was the fire that came after, the secondary fire, the fire that started in 1,000 places at once, in wood and paper and cloth and straw, and all the things that a Japanese city is made of, all the things that burn. And the fires were joining up now, reaching for each other across the flatness, linking arms like dancers, and the heat was building, and the air was thickening, and the smoke was so dense in places that I could not see more than 10 feet in front of me. I walked through fire. I say that simply because it was simple. There was fire, and I walked through it. I did not go around it because there was no around. The fire was everywhere. So I walked through it, and my shoes burned, and my trouser legs burned. And I slapped them out with my good hand, my right hand, because my left arm had stopped being something I could use and had become something I carried, and I kept walking. A man grabbed my sleeve. He was lying on the ground, half under a collapsed wall. Only his arm and his head were visible. His face was burned. One of his eyes was closed, the other was open. And it looked at me, and it was perfectly clear, perfectly sane, perfectly aware. He said, "Water." One word. The only word left in him. I did not have water. I had nothing. I said, "I'm sorry." He did not let go of my sleeve. His fingers tightened, and then slowly they loosened, and his hand fell back, and his eye closed, and I stood there for one breath. 2 breaths, and I walked on. The distances were wrong. That is something I did not expect. I knew these streets. I had walked them 10,000 times. I knew every turn, every corner, every shop, every tree. There were no turns, there were no corners, there were no shops, there were no trees. The landmarks were gone. All of them, everyone. I could not tell where I was. I was lost in my own city, in the city where I was born. In the city I could have navigated blindfolded, because the city was not there anymore. There was only the flatness, and the smoke, and the fires, and the people walking, 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 with their arms out and their skin hanging and their mouths open, and no sound coming out. I navigated by the river. I kept it on my left. I knew that if I kept the river on my left and walked south, I would reach Nakajima, if Nakajima still existed. That thought came to me quietly, without drama, the way a fact arrives. If Nakajima still exists, and I pushed the thought away, I pushed it down. I buried it under the act of walking, under the putting of one foot in front of the other, under the rhythm of the steps. Step, 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 spumiko, step, step, step. Mother, their names were my feet. Their names were what kept me moving. Each step was a name. Each name was a reason. Each reason was a refusal to stop. I found the neighborhood by the river bend. The bend was still there. The river still curved. Geography had not been destroyed. The water still knew where to turn. But the neighborhood, I stood at the place where my street had been. I knew it was my street because of the stone wall. One piece of the stone wall from the Tanaka house, 3 doors down from ours. One piece, standing up out of the rubble like a finger pointing at the sky. Everything else was flat. The wooden houses, our house, the Tanaka's house, the Morita's house, old Mrs. Fujimoto's house with the persimmon tree, the Watanabe's house where the dog always barked at me, all of them were down. All of them were burning, or had already burned. Some were just ash, thin grey ash spread across the ground like a layer of snow. I stood there. I looked at the place where my house had been, and I said their names. Not loudly, not as a shout, as a question. Yoshiko. Nothing. Fumiko. Nothing. Mother? Nothing. The silence answered me. The silence that was louder than any sound. I began to dig with my one good hand, with my right hand. The hand that had not been burned, the hand that could still grip and pull and push. I dug. I pulled at tiles, at pieces of wood, at things I could not identify, things that crumbled when I touched them, things that were still hot, things that burned my fingers, and I did not care. I did not stop, because under those things, under the rubble, under the ash, under the silence, my family was there. They had to be there. They had to be. I dug for a long time. I do not know how long. Time had stopped working. The sun was somewhere behind the smoke, a dull red disk that gave no heat, because the heat was already everywhere, in the ground, in the air, in the rubble under my hand. I dug, and I found things. I found a piece of the bamboo trellis where my mother had grown her morning glories. The bamboo was charred black, but I knew its shape. I knew the way my father had tied the joints with twine. I knew the curve of it. I held it in my hand, and I knew it the way you know your own handwriting. I found a piece of tile from our roof, blue-gray, glazed, with a small chip in one corner where Fumiko had thrown a ball and missed the yard. I found a cup, one of the cups Yoshiko used for tea, cracked but whole. The glaze had changed color from the heat. It was no longer brown. It was a strange, iridescent gray, like the inside of a shell. I held the cup. I held it the way you hold a face, and I dug. I found my mother first. I will not tell you how. I will not tell you what she looked like. I will tell you that she was in the yard, near where the laundry line had been, and that the shirts were gone, and the bamboo pole was gone, and the clothespins were gone. But she was there. She had been hanging laundry. She had been humming. And whatever happened, whatever that light did, whatever that heat did, whatever that new and nameless thing did to the world, it found her there. In the yard, with wet shirts in her hands, humming a song from a green village she would never see again. I knelt beside her. I said the prayers I knew, the ones she had taught me, the ones I had half forgotten, and now remembered perfectly, every word, as though they had been waiting in me for exactly this moment. And I said, "I'm sorry I did not come outside to help you." That is what I said. Standing in the ashes of my house beside the body of my mother, with the sky brown and churning above me, and the fires burning in every direction, and the world, the whole world, the old world, the world of Monday laundry and cucumber gardens and morning glories, gone. I said, "I am sorry I did not come outside to help you," because that is the thought that found me. Not the large thoughts, not the thoughts about war, about God, about the bomb, the small thought, the ordinary thought. I could have gone out to help her. I did not. I was buttoning my shirt instead, and now she is dead, and I was buttoning my shirt. I found Yoshiko and Fumiko together, inside, where the kitchen had been. Together. Yoshiko was holding Fumiko, the same way every mother in every story I have ever heard about the end of the world. The arms around the child, the body curved over the small body, the final gesture, the last thing the body knows how to do when there is nothing left to do. Shield, cover, hold. Fumiko's hair still smelled like soap. I do not know how. I do not know what kind of physics or chemistry or God allows a dead child's hair to still smell like soap when everything else for miles in every direction smells like burning. But it did. I pressed my face into her hair, the way I had that morning, the way I did every morning, the way I was never going to do again. And I breathed in, and for one breath, one single breath, the world was still ordinary. And then the breath ended, and ordinary was over, forever. I stayed with them for a long time. I do not know how long. The time had stopped mattering. The fires were getting closer, and I could feel the heat on my back, and I knew I should move. I knew I should get up. I knew that the living owe the dead the courtesy of staying alive, but I could not get up. I could not leave them. I had left my mother in the yard that morning and gone to button my shirt, and she had died. I had left Yoshiko and Fumiko in the kitchen and gone to work, and they had died. Every time I left them, they died. So I stayed. I stayed until a man found me. A neighbor, Morimoto, from 2 streets over. I did not recognize him at first. His face was swollen. His hair was burned away. He was wearing only the bottom half of his trousers. The rest was gone. He put his hand on my shoulder. He said my name. He said it 3 times before I heard it. And then he said, very quietly, very gently, the way you speak to a child who has fallen and does not yet know how badly he is hurt. You must come now. The fire is coming. You cannot stay. I looked up at him. I cannot leave them, I said. You must. They are here. They are not here, he said. They are somewhere else now. And the fire is coming, and you must come with me, now. He pulled me up. I did not help him. My body did not want to stand, but he pulled me up anyway, with hands that were burned and bleeding, and he put my good arm over his shoulder, and he walked me away from the place where my house had been. And I looked back. I looked back at the rubble, at the ash, at the place where I had found them, and the fire reached it as I watched. And I saw the flames take the place where they were, and Morimoto held me tighter, and we walked. We walked to the East Hills. I do not remember the walk. I remember pieces of it, snapshots, images that come to me at night, still, decades later, without warning, without permission. A horse, standing in the middle of a road, on fire. The horse was on fire, and it was still standing, and it turned its head and looked at me as I passed, and its eye was very large and very dark and very calm, and then it fell. A streetcar stopped on its tracks, full of people. The people were in their seats, in their positions, as though the streetcar had simply stopped at a station and the passengers had decided to wait. They were not waiting, they were dead. every one of them, in their seats. Some still holding the straps, some still holding their bags. A woman near the front still had a fan in her hand, half open, as though she had been fanning herself in the August heat, and the fan had frozen in mid-wave. I saw this. I walked past it. I kept walking. A woman by the road was calling a name, over and over. Kenji, Kenji, Kenji. She was turning in circles, slowly, her arms at her sides, turning and calling. Kenji, Kenji. I do not know who Kenji was, a son, a husband, a brother. I do not know if she found him. I do not know if she survived. I know that she was still turning, still calling, still saying that name as I passed out of earshot. And the name got smaller and smaller behind me, until it was a whisper, until it was nothing. But I hear it still, some nights, when the house is quiet, when the hour is late. Kenji, 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 a woman turning in circles in the ruins of the world, calling a name that no one answers. We reached the hills by evening, the hills above the city. The eastern hills where the trees were still standing, and the grass was still green, and the ground was still cool, and you could sit down and put your hands on the earth and feel something that was not ash. Thousands of people were there, the survivors, the ones who could walk, the ones who had somewhere left in their legs. They sat on the hillside in the grass, and they looked down at the city, and the city was burning, the whole city, from one end to the other. A single fire, not many fires anymore, one fire, one enormous, continuous, living fire, covering everything, reaching from the rivers to the hills, from the harbor to the north, and the flames were so large that they made their own wind, and the wind fed the flames, and the flames grew, and the light of them turned the night into a terrible orange day. I sat on the hill and I watched my city burn, and around me, on the grass, in the dark, people were crying, and people were praying, and people were calling names. So many names, filling the air like birds, rising up from the hillside and going nowhere. A doctor came through sometime in the night. He was not a doctor anymore, not really. He had no instruments, no medicine, no bandages. He had a torn shirt and his hands, and a face that had passed through something that had taken the doctoring out of him and left only the man. He looked at my arm. He said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "I cannot help you with this." "I know," I said. "You need to keep it clean. If you can find water, clean water." "Yes." He looked at me again. "Were they?" "Yes," I said. "They were." He put his hand on my knee, just for a moment. Then he stood up and moved on to the next person, and the next. And the next. There were so many next persons. There would always be so many next persons. I lay on the grass that night and I looked up at the sky. The sky was red, not the red of a sunset, the red of the fire below, reflected on the smoke above. A red ceiling over the world, a red lid on a red jar. And through the red, in the gaps between the smoke, I could see stars, stars, the same stars that had been there that morning, the same stars that had been there yesterday, the same stars that had been there when Fumiko was born, and when I married Yoshiko, and when my mother was a girl in a green village, humming a song she would one day teach to her son. The same stars. And I thought you were watching. You were up there in your cold blue dark, and you were watching, and you saw the sky turn white, and you saw the city vanish, and you saw the people walking with their arms out and their skin hanging, and you saw the river fill with bodies, and you saw the horse on fire, and you saw the woman turning in circles, calling Kenji, and you saw me kneeling in the ash beside my wife and my daughter and my mother. You saw all of it, and you did not move, you did not blink, you did not fall. I am not angry at God. I have never been angry at God. I do not think God did this. I think men did this. Men in a room, in a country I had never seen, looking at a map, pointing at a dot and saying, "That one, that is the one." And the dot was my city, and the dot was my street. And the dot was the kitchen where Yoshiko was feeding Fumiko rice. And the dot was the yard where my mother was hanging shirts. Men did this, men with numbers, men with equations. Men with slide rules and chalk and blackboards and the cold, clean language of physics, which is the language of the universe, which is the language of stars, and they used it to unmake a city and everyone in it. I was a mathematics teacher. I taught numbers to children, and men used numbers to kill my family. I have not been able to love mathematics since. I have not been able to look at an equation without seeing, behind the symbols, the flash. And I know that is not fair. I know the numbers are innocent. I know that mathematics did not do this, that men did this, that the numbers were only tools, the way a knife is only a tool, the way fire is only a tool. But I am not a fair man. I am a man whose daughter's hair smelled like soap, and fairness is a luxury I left in the ashes. The days after, I will not give you everyone, I will give you what I can carry, what I can hand to you without dropping. The black rain that came in the afternoon of the first day, rain that was not rain, rain that was black, oily, thick. It fell from the brown sky and left dark streaks on your skin and dark spots on the ground, and people opened their mouths to it because they were thirsty, because their throats were burned, because they had not had water in hours. They drank the black rain. I did not drink it, not because I knew what it was. I did not know. Nobody knew anything. We did not know what had happened to us. We did not know the word radiation. We did not know the word fallout. We did not have any words for any of it. I did not drink it because it smelled wrong. That is all. A smell saved me or condemned me, because being saved after Hiroshima is its own kind of condemnation. People died in the days after, not from burns, not from wounds, from nothing, from something invisible. They would seem fine, walking, talking. Some of them had not even been injured in the blast. They had been in the right place, behind the right wall, in the right shadow, and then they would get sick, a purple rash, bleeding gums, hair falling out in clumps. A tiredness so deep it went past the bones and into the marrow, and then they would die, and nobody knew why. Nobody knew why a man who had seemed healthy on Monday was dead by Thursday. Nobody knew why a woman who had walked away from the blast without a scratch was vomiting blood a week later. We did not know. We would not know for months, for years, for decades, and some of us would spend the rest of our lives waiting for the sickness, waiting for the rash, waiting for the hair to start falling, waiting for the bomb to finish what it started, because the bomb did not end on August 6th. The bomb does not end. It is still happening, inside the cells of people who were there, inside the genes of children who were not yet born, inside the water, inside the soil, inside the memory. The bomb is always still happening. Morimoto died on the fourth day, the man who pulled me from the rubble, the man who put my arm over his shoulder and walked me to the hills. He sat down on the grass in the morning and said, "I'm tired," and by evening he was gone. I sat with him, the way he had sat with me, and when he stopped breathing, I closed his eyes, and I said his name, Morimoto, the way the woman had said Kenji, the way I had said Yoshiko, the way everyone in that city was saying someone's name over and over, because saying the name was the last thread, the last connection, the last proof that the person had existed, that they had been real, that they had not just been a dream you had in a world that was no longer dreaming. I survived. You know this because I'm telling you. I survived. And I have spent the rest of my life wondering why. Not in the philosophical sense, not why me in the grand cosmic sense, in the small sense, the practical sense. Why me and not Yoshiko? Why me and not Fumiko? Why me and not my mother? Why was I 6 blocks away and not 5? Why did I leave the house at 8:10 and not 5 past? Why was I walking and not standing still? Why was I on the north side of the street and not the south? The mathematics of survival. The numbers that I cannot love anymore. 1 second, 1 step, 1 degree of angle between me and the light. That is the distance between being alive and being ash. 1 second, the time it takes a 4-year-old girl to swallow a bite of rice. I'm old now, very old. I live in a city that is not Hiroshima because I could not stay in Hiroshima, because Hiroshima rebuilt itself. And the new buildings stand where the old buildings stood. and people walk on the streets where the people walked with their arms out, and children play in parks where the fires burn, and I could not bear it. I could not bear the ordinary, the new ordinary, the ordinary that grew up out of the ashes like grass, like morning glories on a bamboo trellis. I could not bear to see people hanging laundry. I could not bear to see mothers feeding children rice. I could not bear to see a blue sky on a Monday morning. So I left, and I have lived somewhere else ever since, in a small room with a window that faces east, and every morning when the sun comes up, I watch it. I watch it carefully. I check that it is the right size, that it is the right color, that it is rising the way it is supposed to rise, slowly, gently, gradually, the way suns are supposed to rise, and not all at once, and not from below. A young woman came to see me last month, a student, a historian. She was writing about the survivors, the hibakusha, the ones who were there. She sat in my small room with a notebook and a recorder and a face full of careful kindness, and she asked me questions. She asked what I remembered. She asked what the flash looked like. She asked what the sound was like. She asked how I felt, and I tried to tell her. I opened my mouth and I tried, and what came out was not the flash, not the sound, not the heat. What came out was the laundry. The shirts on the line, the breeze through the window, the way Fumiko chewed her rice, the sound of my mother humming, the way Yoshiko said, "Be careful," every morning, and the way I said I will be home before dark. That is what came out of me. The morning. The ordinary morning. The morning that was the last morning of the world, and the young woman stopped writing, and she put down her pen, and she looked at me, and I think she understood in that moment, with her pen on the table and her notebook open to a blank page, that the story of the bomb is not about the bomb. It is about the morning before the bomb. It is about the ordinary. It is about the shirts. I say their names every morning. When the sun rises, when I have checked that it is rising the way it should, I say them quietly. To the window, to the light, Yoshiko, my wife, who said, "Be careful," Fumiko, my daughter, who named the dragonflies, mother, who hummed while she hung the laundry, Morimoto, who carried me when I could not walk, the girls walking to the demolition site, one of them laughing behind her hand, the woman in the road, holding what she held, the woman turning in circles, calling Kenji, the man who asked me for water, whose fingers loosened, the horse that turned its head and looked at me, the people in the streetcar, still holding their bags, the city, the morning. I do not want you to be angry after hearing this. I do not want you to be sad. I want you to go outside. I want you to look at the sky. I want you to check that it is blue. And then I want you to go home and find the person you love and sit with them while they eat and watch them the way Yoshiko watched Fumiko, with your chin in your hand, with all the time in the world, because you do have all the time in the world until you don't, and you will never know which morning is the last one. No one ever knows. We didn't. The sky was perfect that day. I have told you this already. I will tell you again. The sky was perfect, and then it wasn't. And everything between those two sentences is a life. Remember us, remember us, remember us,